Thank you, Sarah, for a terrific show and for being here and for executing the project. And thank you, of course, to Joan and Stu for sharing these incredible treasures and your stories and just being a really terrific group of individuals to work with. So thank you. And with that, Sarah, I'll let you take it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lee.
You really became much more involved with contemporary art world when you moved to Los Angeles. Is that correct?
That's correct. We moved to LA in 1974, and I was in practice at Cedars. The Gemini g.e.l. Art printing shop was very close, and I remember buying a few pieces for the office and getting to know the people there and the printers, and we just got involved in the local scene.
Yeah. But it was really when you retired from your medical practice that you became so involved. I was talking to your daughter about how you went to kind of every museum opening and gallery show that you could, and you guys would really be involved in the contemporary art scene. How did you kind of develop this passion, and what really stirred this passion for contemporary art?
Well, I think it sort of grew on itself. When I retired, I was in good health, except that my vision wasn't good enough to continue operating. So it gave me the time to spend a lot of time at galleries. It so happened that the hospital at which I work, Cedars-Sinai, probably has one of the best collection of prints in California. Around, I think, 1980, and I won't go into the story, but a well-known collector and her husband, Marcia and Fred Weissman, decided to open up a art program at Cedars because Marcia felt that art would help with healing. And they accumulated a fantastic collection and have probably 5,000 or 6,000 pieces, many of which are really quite valuable. And when I retired, I became very active on the Art Advisory Council at Cedars and became the vice chairman and actually sort of became the quasi-curator of the collection. Mm-hmm. And that also gave me a chance to really see and work with lots of prints.
That's so interesting. And you had talked a little bit about that you started taking classes at UCLA. When you started taking classes, were they in printmaking or?
No. When I retired, everybody says, you know, what do you do when you retire? So there's a program at UCLA called the Senior Scholar Program, where you can sign up and basically audit undergraduate courses. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to perhaps take some of the courses that I couldn't have taken at Cornell because I was pre-med. So the first few courses I took were in Shakespeare. And the professor was a man by the name of David Rhodes, who at the time was the director of the Grunwald Center for Graphic Arts at UCLA. And through him, I got involved with the Grunwald Center and have stayed very active there through the years. And I should mention, because she won't, that Sarah worked with Cindy Burlingham, who's the director there. And I got a note from Cindy the other day expressing her feelings about how great you are, how, you know, how she, quote, adores you.
We've had a great tutor, both of us, in Cindy, talking about prints, and I think that's something that's both shaped both of our kind of studies of printmaking is these personal relationships we've been so lucky to have. And you developed particularly close relationships with ULIE and Gemini. Those kind of have been your two hubs for your collecting practice. Who were you most involved with at those two kind of print powerhouses?
Well, the ULIE, which is based in New York, and Gemini, which is in LA, are really the two premier printmakers, although there are several others that are emerging. We would go to New York frequently for family visits, and we made it a point to be there when the print fair was in town and so forth. And I'm trying to remember how I first met Bill Goldston, who is the head of the of ULAE. And it's interesting because, you know, when you talk about collectors and you're thinking about Eli Broad or Guggenheim or, you know, the big timers, you don't realize that the people in the art world are really very accessible. And if you show them that you're interested, you know, they're very accessible. And so through the years, we became very friendly with Bill. And in fact, the experience that I remember very well was Joan and I went out to their studio in New York, and Bill was taking us around. And I said, you know, I love prints, but they're so damn complicated, I really can't figure out how they're done. So Bill put an apron on both of us, took us back in the workshop, gave us each a copper plate, and marched us through, you know, the whole process, which really made us, you know, very much aware of how complex the print process really is. And I should mention, there's a print right through there of a woman with a camel in the background. It's Larry Rivers, and that's Tanya Grossman, who was the founder of ULAE. She and her husband came over to flee the Nazis and opened this print workshop in New York, which has lasted through the years. The other shop that I got very involved with was Gemini g.e.l. In LA. And Sarah and I had a wonderful visit there a few weeks ago where Sidney Felsen, who was one of the co-founders with Stanley Grinstein, met with us, and we sat with him and his wife for probably close to 2 hours and just heard great stories about how it started and their philosophy and so forth. And through the years, I've been very involved with them.
Yeah, it's something that you see throughout your collection, not only when you talk about the individual works you've collected, but also when you see kind of each work is really the process of a relationship. You see, even in this work behind us, this is a Rosenquist that is kind of done in homage to Rosenquist's mentor and teacher Marcel Duchamp, and it's Dawn Descending a Staircase in honor of the new Descending the Staircase, this seminal painting. And so you really see that not only are these kind of your personal relationships that we've seen, but also you're so attuned to the relationships between artists. And I guess kind of stemming from that, and you touched on this a little bit of your personal history in Cincinnati, but what particularly drew you to the Dine works and the Kelly works when you were, when thinking about your own personal history?
It's a loaded question.
I know.
Well, the Jim Dines, which are right behind you, and the one on the left with the names written on it. Jim Dine grew up in Cincinnati. His younger brother, Tom, was my best friend. In fact, I just talked to him 2 days ago. And so the print on the left, which has all the names on it, was really a revolutionary thing. And at the time, I think it's from 1967 or whatever, when the abstract expressionists were more popular, and then all of a sudden, you know, Jasper Johns and Rauschenberg and Jim Dine arrive on the scene. And this was really a revolutionary piece of art. And what's interesting to me about it, which, you know, you all would not be able to recognize, is that I probably know 80% of the people who are on that thing. They're all the kids I went to high school with, our teachers, our doctors, his family. And so it obviously has, you know, a personal meaning. The other piece that she referred to was the Ellsworth Kelly around on the back, which is the long horizontal piece with 18 colored panels. And that was a piece that Ellsworth Kelly did he did the 18 panels for a bank in Cincinnati, and the bank subsequently is gone, but I think the pieces, the canvases are now in the National Gallery. But the reason that that piece is interesting is that it was one of the pieces at Gemini where Ellsworth Kelly, who had been doing most of his work in black and white, decided to do colors. And so the name of the piece is 18 Colors or Cincinnati. And what's interesting about it, because I read a little bit about it as you did, it looks like something that your grandchild could do with Crayolas. But it took him 3 years to finalize it. He was such an exacting artist that the colors had to be just right, and they had to line up the squares and so forth. So more complicated than it looks like.
Yeah, a little beyond kind of surface level appearances, which is something you touched on a little bit. We can kind of relate that to printmaking more broadly. I think so often printmaking doesn't appear to be something as complex as it really is. The process of making is so technical, and so much of your collection are prints. What drew you to printmaking initially, and why did you pick kind of prints to have as your focus and center of your collection?
Should I give you an intellectual answer or a real answer?
Let's do both.
The reason many people are driven to prints is simply a question of cost. If you want to buy a Jasper Johns original piece right now, you have to be an oil sheik. With prints, you can have the same artists, and something that I don't think the general public understands is that the artists who are really expert at printmaking look on that as a real challenge. It's not many people will say, oh, it's just running off 20 things through a mimeograph machine. It's a very complicated collaborative process, and I think many of the artists who are great at printmaking recognize it as such and really look at it as a challenge. And so with us, it was a way of, we recognized the artists that we loved, and just as a matter of reality, printmaking was just a more realistic way of collecting.
Absolutely. And I think your collection really does show how much you guys honor that process and how much you are interested in that process. And I want to encourage you all, being that you can't see it where you're currently seated, but to check out this working proof, Rauschenberg's working proof that we have here. It's an incredibly rare and amazing example to be able to see a bit behind the printmaking process. And I encourage you guys all, when we're done, to check out that working proof of Bellini #1. So I guess another theme in your collection, if we think about printmaking as being one theme, the 1960s and both the politics and printmaking are kind of two enormous themes in your collection. What first drew you to the 1960s as a kind of focus for your collection?
The fact that we were 20 years old when it happened. No, we grew up in that period. I mean, we were there for the Civil Rights Movement, for JFK, for the Vietnam War. It was a hectic period, just as the one we're going through now is. And we were part of all of that, so we were naturally interested in a lot of it. And the artists that we primarily enjoy, the Rauschenbergs and the Johns and the Rosenquists and the Dines, were all very involved politically. Their works reflected deep beliefs that went way beyond just the visual pictures that they made. And there's some examples that when Sarah says that each of the prints has a story, there is a print around the corner by Klaus Oldenburg which looks like a, what is it, a caterpillar with a lipstick.
Yeah.
And it's one of his large sculptures. And just looking at it, you know, it's just a print. But the story behind it is that he created this thing during the Vietnamese War. And the piece was actually positioned at the Yale Art School. And you're familiar with Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park. When people wanted to give a political speech or something, they would go, and I don't know what they do, ring a bell or whatever. But with this one, if you look closely at it, it's this large caterpillar-like structure with a crank. And when you crank the hydraulic pump, a lipstick, red lipstick, comes out of the top. Very phallic looking, but the point of this was that if someone wanted to give a anti-war speech at Yale, they would get up on this thing, pump it, and it could be seen from you know, everywhere, and people would know that someone is getting ready to deliver a speech. So, you know, there's meaning in the piece that you wouldn't recognize by just looking at the print. And as far as the working proof that Sarah just referred to, one of the I won't say tricks, but one of the ways that we really were able to acquire some wonderful, wonderful prints is that in the process of printmaking, normally there's an edition size, 50, 100, whatever it may be. But in addition to that, they will print a certain number of, quote, artist proofs, which they give to the artist. But they also will print a printer's proof, because the printer who collaborates with the artist is really an integral and very important part of it. And this is the reward that they get for doing it. And many of these printers keep these things, and it's basically their pension fund. They know that, you know, when they retire, that these pieces, in many instances, will be worth a lot of money. Well, one of the printers, one of the master printers at ULAE, many years ago, there was a shift in, Bill Goldston just had a rearrangement, and he replaced a couple of his master printers. The one that I befriended was a man named Craig Zamiello, who is now the master printer at another print shop called Two Palms in New York, which I think is rapidly becoming, you know, the leading shop. But when Craig was between positions, I think he was short of cash. And so through a dealer that we knew in New York, she said, you know, there's this former printer who's willing to sell some of his prints at very good prices. So if you look closely at several of the Johns prints and a couple of the others, you'll see that they're PP, they're printer's proofs. And so there are many avenues. You don't just, you know, go to the gallery on Rodeo Drive or on Madison Avenue to the print shop. As my brother, who also collects, said, it's like hunting. It's the hunt that is really the important part, not the kill. And I think that's very true. I mean, there's, as I say, almost a story with every one of these prints that has background like that.
I know, and I do, walking through your house, it's absolutely fabulous because you really do kind of have a story about every print. Every print has a special narrative, but I do have to ask, and I don't think I've ever asked you this, do you have a favorite print in your collection, or do you have a favorite work that you have a special memory of, or is that asking you to pick a favorite child? Right there.
Be careful what I say here. Not really. As my daughter knows, this Rosenquist print is certainly special. We love that. The other print, which is very meaningful to me, is the series that you see, the 14 prints there that are by a New York artist, Terry Winters, who really is a little more contemporary than Rauschenberg and Johns and so forth. But the reason that is interesting to me is that if you look at those, in the lower right of each of those prints is a photograph of an X-ray. And those are the original X-rays that were taken by Röntgen, who was the founder of X-rays. And then Terry Winters would look at each of those anatomical X-rays and, you know, do what he did abstractly above. But so those are very meaningful to me. But you know, a lot of them are like grandkids. You know, it's hard to choose a favorite.
I know, the Winters are really so fabulous. He worked with a printer to develop such an interesting technical process that each of the X-rays has such a luminous quality. They're really special, so I invite you guys all, after we're done, to really go up and look at these works so much more closely. But your collection really does highlight the work of Jasper Johns. So I feel like I would be remiss to not ask you, why Jasper Johns? What about his work? What about, and Joan has, even maybe for those of you who don't know, your puppy is also named Jasper. I guess he's maybe not a puppy anymore. So there's a fondness for Jasper Johns. Maybe, where does that come from, and what inspired that?
There are actually a couple of things. Number one, I think, you know, he's one of the greatest contemporary artists. He's a little bit mysterious. Mm-hmm. He's very private. You have no idea really what is going through his mind, and he comes up with all kinds of new things. He also is constantly exploring new techniques. Mm-hmm. And very interesting. A lot of people try to interpret his work, and I'm not sure all of them really know what they're doing. It just so happens that when I mentioned that I roomed in college with Harry Abrams' son, well, he married a young woman who Joan actually went all through grade school with in high school, and she is now Jasper Johns' personal assistant. She handles all of his prints. She lives right next door to him in Connecticut. And through her, I've learned a lot. But there's sort of a mystery to each of his works. One of them that's fun that Sarah may mention is, as you come in, there's the flag, the orange and green flag back there. And it's worth spending a minute or two there. And quote story behind that, and again, it's this mystery, is it really true? Because Jasper doesn't answer. Leo Castelli was the major gallerist in New York who handled all of these young artists when they were struggling. They were all had second jobs as sign painters or as store window decorators and things like that. And he was paying them $50 a week so that they have a roof over their head. And he had a whole stable of these young artists. And the story, which may or not be true, but certainly sounds good, is that with that particular piece, Jasper Johns, was showing Castelli his pieces, and Castelli said, with all of this new pop art, the people who are coming into the gallery are saying, how long does it take to look at a Brillo can, or how long does it take to look at a beer can or whatever. So Jasper, if this is true, said, I'll come up with something so that they'll have to look at it a little longer. So if you look at that piece, when you get back there, we'll point it out to you. If you look at the upper flag, which is green and orange, there's a little dot in the center of that. And if you stare at that dot for 30 or 40 or 50 seconds, and then quickly glance down at the blank gray square at the bottom of the print, you will see a red and blue flag. And so he's playing on the rods and cones of the retina, if this indeed is true. But there's a lot of thought that goes behind it. And another piece talking about Johns, which I think is around the corner, is a piece that he just did at MoMA in New York, at the Modern Museum. He recently did a series of paintings, drawings, and prints that was entitled Regrets.
It's directly in our back wall. So our back wall has a nice little...
And again, what is the story of this? Well, Jasper Johns has a stamp because people are constantly writing him to autograph a picture or send a note to their granddaughter or whatever it is. And he's very personal, so he has a stamp. And he just sends it back to them with regret on it. And if you look at the upper right corner of that, you'll see regret. But the image in it itself is based on a photograph that Francis Bacon had of Lucian Freud. The two of them had a relationship. And the regret, some people feel, is based on the relationship that Jasper Johns had with Rauschenberg. When they first started off in the late 50s, they were lovers. And they subsequently, separated. And some people question, when they're interpreting this, is Jasper Johns looking back and saying, do I regret breaking up? Is that the regret that he's referring to? So again, there's usually a lot behind his work, and that's one of the things that makes it appealing.
I know, your collection really is so special, especially in terms of John's. We can see things from his work in the 60s all the way until this 2014 was Regrets, and so it really spans the artist's career in an incredibly impressive way. I guess, and right before we open this up to questions, my last question for you is there anything that has changed after you've seen now your fabulous collection outside of your home, now in this gallery setting? Is there anything that's kind of changed for you seeing these works, or do you have any other different opinion of these works now, seeing them all in one room and all kind of together in this setting?
All I can say is that Joan and myself and the kids were really overwhelmed by this. I mean, it's way beyond our expectations or anything. We've never looked on our collection as something for a museum. It all sort of started when Elise and Bruce, I've had a relationship with the museum for several years and worked with the students and so forth. And it just sort of started off when Bruce said, could we borrow a few of these Johns and Rauschenbergs for an exhibit or something? I said, of course. And then a week or two later, it was, we think maybe we'd like to have a larger exhibition. And, that was great. And then I get a third call. We have this wonderful PhD candidate up here, and it would be great for her to have, as part of her background, that she had curated a show and written a catalog. And I said, great, because I loved working with students. When I was a doctor, I loved working and teaching the residents. So it all just sort of evolved into this wonderful event. And I must say that when we came up here last week for the opening, and saw the big poster outside and then walked in and saw this, it was really just overwhelming. And I just can't thank all of you guys for doing this, because it's been a wonderful, wonderful experience for us. Oh. And it's also been educational in the sense that you appreciate how much hard work goes into an exhibition like this. This, on the scale of 100, is a relatively simple one because you've got one collector. But there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, and there were a lot of people involved And they were all great. It was really just a delight.
Well, it was very
doing
fun
this-
for us.
this whole
We
thing.
were very lucky, and to both you and Joan, we can't say thank you guys enough. I guess I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience, if anybody has any questions for Stu.
What were the first and second works that you bought once you embarked on your career? Or
Well,
buying
the
it?
first,
Are they still in the collection? Or have you
yeah,
separated them all?
the first pieces we bought were on our honeymoon. In Paris, we went to some little bookshop or something on the left bank, and we bought 3 prints, which we still have, or Anne still has. One was a little Leger. It was probably a print that was torn out of a book. And there was a little etching by Bonnard of Renoir. And the third one was a little print entitled Matrimony by Freelander. Those were the 3. As far as the prints that we bought, one of them is here. It's called Rookery Mounds, and it's a piece by Rauschenberg. And what's interesting about that piece is that I bought it from Gemini, and the person I bought it from there was Joan g.e.l, who is Sidney Felson's wife. My wife's maiden name, Joan, was Joan Weil. The medical school I went to was Cornell, but now it's the Sanford and Joan Weil Medical College of Cornell, whatever. So that's sort of a interesting little twist. We've kept just about everything. You know, we've donated a few things, sold very few pieces. But we really have just about everything that we've bought. I mean, we've shared it with some of our offspring. But in general, you know, we hold on to them.
I know, and you've kept wonderful records, so whoever manages that next part, it's fabulous. You get to see kind of your whole collection, and you really have kept everything, and the most fabulous records, so it made my job as a curator so easy. Any other questions for Sue? Yes.
I'm seeing a contrast mechanically in some of the ones that you've chosen. This Rosenquist is a little bit hard edged on the borders with a nice white frame, maybe a closure and containing the image, but just over your shoulder is this gorgeous Rauschenberg, which likewise achieves beautiful colors, but when they're layered and nuanced, overlaying, ragged to the edges, dripping, and so forth away. And I wonder if, as you became at all acquainted with either the artists themselves or their handlers, you developed a greater respect for obtaining the melding on the left of this Rosenquist, those gorgeous, almost watercolor-like hues that blend from one to another, or whether actually you've fallen increasingly for the splattered, layered, collage-like effects of a Rauschenberg. Just wondering.
So the question is more
Way beyond my pay scale. To be very honest with you, I think it's really an emotional response. There are certain things that we see that we just love, you know, and without going into, you know, all of the technical details about how they were made, we just like them for the way they look. There was a Rauschenberg show at the Guggenheim years ago, and it was, you know, an extensive retrospective where they had his paintings and his combines and all that, and at the very end of it, they had a few of his recent prints. And I saw this image and just said, I love it. And you know, pursued it. It had just been published by ULAE, and yeah, so I bought it at the time. But it was really more just the visual attraction than any, you know, hidden meaning or understanding of the technique that went into it.
Absolutely, I know. I wanted to get to the in the back. Yeah, that's perfect.
Hi.
Sorry, I don't know your name.
Thank you. I have a friend who was a surgeon and without training became a painter and sculptor. And I'm wondering if you, in your case, a surgeon's eye sees things that are not revealed to the rest of us, you know, in a layered way that is both complex and wondrous, really. I'm wondering if you have any comments about your medical training and experience as a surgeon, how it might have changed your perception of art and things that we discover in this work.
As far as my artistic ability, even before I had my visual problem, I had a hard time drawing a straight line with a ruler. So as far as any inherent talent, it's not there. As far as the observation, I'm not sure. I do notice that in many pieces of contemporary art, if you look closely at them, they are based on medical stuff. Like Terry Winters has several images that are very clearly images from a CAT scan. And so there are those type things. But in answer to your question, I don't think, I do know several surgeons who are artistically involved. One of the orthopedist friends of mine is a fairly accomplished sculptor. But as far as myself personally, I can't claim any special talent.
Neither can I. I just like to look, I guess. And
I'm sure that you and Joan, when you collect, you do this collaboratively. For the most part, agree on acquisitions. Have there been pieces that you don't agree on that are part of your collection?
I don't want to get into that. I would say that generally, in her quiet way, Joan has probably a better eye than I do. She is not as enthusiastic about covering every little spot on the wall. That wall's already filled. What do you need another one for? So there is somewhat of an illness that
He became obsessive, I felt, about the collecting side. I love the art, and I love having pieces I like to look at in the house. But then when things start accumulating in closets, I wasn't as enthusiastic.
But it, you know, as sure many of you may know, it really does become somewhat of an illness where it's just a priority. You see something and you just have to have it, you know, and can't explain where that comes from, but that's part of it. But Joan, I must say that I had the time and did a lot more, as you said in your brochure, sleuthing, you know, where I would comb the galleries and, you know, go into the back rooms and this and that and come up upon something. But except for a few little sneaks, Joan was the final approval that was necessary.
the quiet voice behind, yes.
By the way, I describe it as an addiction, because I have it. So. A few years back, I discovered the world of monoprints, which I find a really interesting market. I think they're very underpriced. I'm just wondering, I see what's here, but wondering if you've gotten there also.
Absolutely. Monoprints, and again, Sarah could probably explain exactly what they are. They're prints of the same subject, but then they're individualized, so that although they are a print, each one is different. And I think you're right that it has, I think, emerged more recently. And yes, we have several of those. And what's been a little bit exciting for me is that my eye is good. I mean, in spite of my bad vision, I can spot the right artists, but I can't afford them. So many of the artists who we have, the more contemporary ones, in several cases we have monoprints. Like, for example, I don't know if you all are familiar with Mark Bradford, who is now, you know, one of the best known LA artists, and his works are, you know, out of reach. I have an early monoprint that he did before anyone knew who he was. And another artist who does a lot of monoprints is Mel Bachner. And we have a couple of his pieces. So yes, I think it's a way of, you always want to feel that you have something a little special. And this is a way of saying, you know, I really have a unique piece, and yet it's not an oil painting by Gauguin.
Or is it much of a series?
Yeah, exactly. And so yes, I think that is a great way and you know, to collect and to obtain something from, you know, a really well-known artist that may be just a little bit more personal than getting one of the edition of 50.
It is, I know, I have told people that this is only part of your collection, and that is, there's so much more that's still left at your house that it's kind of really fabulous that we even get to see part of it here. But a visit to your house really is such a special experience because you get to see all the different works that you've collected, whether or not they quite fit within our exhibition format, but that was really such a great experience to see. Any other questions? Yes.
What's the piece that you wake up looking at every morning?
Well, it changes because at the foot of our bed, the piece that was there was replaced by a big TV set. And the piece that to the left of it, we took down. And we actually just hung a piece that we bought, you know, even though I'm through buying, you know, occasionally that itch. We were at Gemini a month or two ago, and they had a show of David Hockney's etchings of characters, you know, in his life, different people. And there was this one image that I'd known about for years of Gregory Evans as a young man. Gregory Evans was David Hockney's first lover, and I think he still manages his studio or his estate. But this was an etching of Gregory, and that's what we wake up looking at right now.
I know we've stolen a lot of your works to have them here, so
I haven't had a good night's sleep since this whole thing started.
Thank you guys all so much. Is there any other questions, or we'll let you go, and I'm sure you'll be happy to talk to people, and if anybody has any further questions, please do come up and ask us. Thank you so much, Stu. Thank you so much, Joan. We wouldn't be able to do this without you, and thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
You're more than welcome, and thank you.